I'd like to call to meeting the April 17th meeting of the City of Belvedere Finance Committee meeting. Helga or Robert, could you call roll?
Chair McCaskill,
Here.
John Wilton,
Here.
David Walker,
Present.
Patrick Fader,
Here.
Will Lyon is absent, Sally Wilkinson,
Present.
Peter Mark,
Here.
and we have Robert Zadnick, City Manager, and Helga Cotter, Director of Administrative Services, and Anthony Boyd, Director of Public Works here.
Great, thank you. Robert, do we have anyone on the Zoom call?
No one on the attendee side. We do have Terry Madsen, who's going to be doing a presentation for item number 3.
Okay, this is normally the point in time which we call for public comment, but apparently is no public members attending. So at this point, we can move on to the second item, which is to approve the minutes of the January 29th Finance Committee meeting. Are there any comments, questions, or changes to those minutes? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve? So moved. And a second?
Second.
We have to roll call for this?
Yes.
Okay,
Chair McCaskill,
yes.
John Wilton,
Yes.
Patrick Fader,
Yes.
and David Walker.
Aye.
Motion
Passes
carries.
unanimously.
Third item on the agenda is the presentation by ClearSource Financial Consulting. Helga, do you want to introduce that?
Thank you, Chair McCaskill and committee. The item before you is to give the committee a brief overview of the findings and recommendations from the recently completed comprehensive user fee study. On September 9th, 2024, Council approved the contract for ClearSource Financial Consultant to conduct a user fee study, which started in October. On March 10th, 2025, we brought the draft findings to the council for their review and input. On Monday, April 14th, the council conducted a public hearing and approved the new fee schedule, which will go into effect July 1st, 2025. This is the first time the city has conducted a comprehensive analysis of its user fees. The fee study ensures that the city has an accurate fee schedule that reflects the true cost of providing services. The new fee schedule achieves maximum cost recovery while providing a fair, comprehensive, well-documented, and defensible method for identifying and distributing costs. At this time, I will turn over the presentation to Terry Madsen, President of ClearSource Financial Consulting, to present a brief overview of the study and results for background and information as the effects have been incorporated into the draft 25-26 budget.
Thank you so much, Chair and members of the committee, for allowing me to speak with you. I will be brief. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you should see a presentation. Are you seeing it? Perfect. Okay. Helga mentioned that this item has come before the council, and the council has actually adopted an updated schedule of fees. They considered the item over several reviews, and ultimately earlier this week an updated fee schedule was adopted, and the adopted fees will go into effect July 1, 2025. When we think about what the council adopted, we want to highlight that it was what we call user and regulatory fees. So these are service-based fees primarily for like building permit and plan review, engineering work, planning work, and so forth. They were not considering or updating any taxes, assessments, utility rates, development impact fees. So nothing that sort of affects our Belvedere residents on like a day-to-day basis or these periodic impact fees. Instead, it was service-based permit type fees that are sort of occur periodically as construction activities occur. And just as a reminder, when we think about this topic, we think about the idea of cities having their tax revenue base and using that tax revenue base primarily for services that provide broad community-wide benefit like public works services, public safety services, park maintenance services, and so forth. And they're generally using things like fees and charges when they see a direct receiver of service. So direct receiver of service, direct cost recovery. And in Belvedere's case, it's typically plan review, permitting, and construction inspection. The reason cities undertake these types of efforts and periodically review and adjust their fees are, number one, to comply with legal requirements, because these are fees and not taxes. We're governed by the California Constitution and the California Government Code, which help us understand the idea of fees are not in the profit-making business. We're in the idea of cost recovery, but not anything beyond cost recovery. And when we collect building fees, we want to recover the cost of building services, not other ancillary services like public safety services or something like that. So we want to comply with our legal requirements. By definition, when we recover the cost of these services, we are freeing up the city's general fund resources to be used for some other purpose. And then when we recover our cost of service, we think about the idea of positioning ourselves to continue to meet the service level expectation of the community. In Belvedere, what we found was that your current fees recovered less than your costs of service. So we felt like if we examined fee-related costs of service in Belvedere, we thought there was about $2 million in fee-related services being conducted in any given year. It might vary from year to year, but it's in the neighborhood of $2 million a year. And your typical fee collections are in the neighborhood of $1 million a year. So we felt like we had about 53% cost recovery. That's what the analysis showed. And that means that there was what we would call a general fund subsidy of $968,000. Once that information was presented to council, we talked through the idea of how do council members frequently consider the idea of what do I want to target from cost recovery. And what we walked through was this idea that when we do see a clear receiver of benefit, we frequently see councils target high cost recovery levels. When we see high community benefit, we see councils target lower cost recovery levels. In the case of what we were examining at Belvedere, it felt like there was a very clear connection to direct benefit received. The fees are regulatory in nature. When someone's doing construction Belvedere, we feel like they are enjoying the enhanced property values, they're enjoying the benefits of the new construction, the enjoyment of the new construction, and so forth. And so it made sense to target full cost recovery to avoid having other Belvedere residents and businesses subsidize someone's individual private construction activities. Thinking through the impacts of those adopted fees, what we see is, I mentioned that current cost recovery levels were about 53%. We believe there would be a fiscal impact of the fee changes in the initial year of about $594,000, and that would adjust incrementally for the next several years to, $594,000 in that initial year, and then about $70,000 in the out years. Council also adopted an annual pattern of inflationary adjustments. So each year, staff will review the change in regional cost inflation and can adjust fees to account for that change in regional cost inflation. The idea is that every 3 to 5 years, you would undertake another comprehensive study like this, but in the in-between years, you could just apply those reasonable inflationary adjustments. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm happy to receive any feedback or questions from the committee.
Questions, comments from the committee? Dave?
I have just a couple. One, thank you, Terry. You answered one of my questions about how the future adjustments would be made. So those are staff reviewed. I had a question on the phase-in. Is the phase-in just a result of when projects are submitted and when the fees are occurred. So you've got projects that are in the pipeline that may have some fees under the old scale and then some fees under the new. Is that how the phase-in works?
It's actually a tiny bit different than that. So the idea is that we believe there's going to be new fees that go into effect July 1, 2025, and we do think that the city will experience a fiscal impact from those new fees. But frequently, what we see is cities say, I'd like to see the revenue actually show up before I start depending on it to show up. So the idea of the phase in is in the initial year, you're allowing yourself to actually see the new revenue show up before you start depending on it. And then in those future years, that very minor phase in is us trying to err on the side of conservative. There's a few fees that we would call deposit-based fees or time and materials fees, or they're new fees. They didn't exist before and they're coming online, and we just want to give ourselves time to make sure they're working appropriately and to make sure that sort of what we intend to happen is actually happening. So it's just an
So most of the phase-in is a result of a budget application as opposed to a legal
correct.
timeline. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. And then just one other question, minor. There are these fees that don't reach 100%. They reach 57 and 29%, development, technology, and general plan update. And I was just curious as to a couple examples of what those fees are for.
Yeah, no problem. So the general plan update in particular was a fee where the council felt like, you know, the general plan does benefit existing Belvedere residents and businesses and so forth. And so they were looking for less than full cost recovery. We had actually already proposed less than full cost recovery. The idea is that when somebody does new construction in Belvedere, there will be a fee collected and set aside to be deliberately used for long-range planning activities like future
Wow.
update of the general plan, zoning code updates, and so forth.
Okay,
But some of those costs only occur periodically. And some of them are so significant that we feel like it's unreasonable for you to be able to recover them all via these fees. And so that's why there's the targeted partial cost recovery.
all right, thank you. I'd just add that I commend the staff and the city council for undertaking this project, and as a resident and taxpayer, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Comment. So as a career consultant, I enjoyed the presentation with the justifications lined up. However, I disagree with some of them, and everybody here is aware that my wife and I filed for and achieved planning approval for reconstruction, and hopefully we'll be able to get the building permit done before July 1st. I would argue that, especially in the case of reconstruction, there's significant benefit through higher property taxes going to the city for many, many years to come that benefit the entire community and not only the homeowner, in addition to, you know, the beauty of a new house versus something that's old and dilapidated. So while I understand why the city does it, we've had many other attempts at increasing our revenue. None of them have made it because they require citizen approval. We saw that with the fire tax. We saw that with the seawall fund. I do not think that in the long term, this is more than a stopgap measure. And we really need to look at how can we encourage smart renovations and construction so that the revenue that we achieve over the years through property tax increases and becomes, you know, a bigger source of revenue than fees.
Can I jump in on that? I agree with you completely in the sense that Well, I don't see this so much as a stopgap measure to fix anything necessarily. I think it was a leveling or an adjustment that needed to happen, irrespective of where we stand financially from a city perspective. We've been trying and will continue to try to actualize and to realize the tax benefit of home improvements. It's really hard. We're having a hard time getting any close to a one-to-one relationship. Meaning the dollars put in versus the assessment result just doesn't happen. Combination of low estimates coming in, low actuals coming in. I won't call it fraudulent, but I'll call it reticence to be accurate about those numbers. Our ability as a city to efficiently validate those numbers to the degree that's a compelling case for the county. So oftentimes we throw our hands up and give the county the opportunity to do their own assessment, and they typically shoot lower than they probably should. So I mean, you'd like to have a one-to-one, a dollar put into construction results in the 11% of the 20% or the 11% total of the tax coming back to the city, but that doesn't always happen. So I'll leave it at that.
Peter, my memory is bad, but thought I recall some number of years ago, we're probably talking about 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, we had talked about the city itself starting to audit those costs of new construction. Does anybody, I'm probably the only one that was around then maybe, but because at that time there was the same understanding, the county just didn't devote much resources to it. But I thought my recollection was that a city has the right to audit those numbers themselves. Is that true, Robert, or do you know?
Yeah, we did undertake a project to look at that. I think that's what Peter was alluding to, some of the, the process and how we interact with the county. Peter, did you want to summarize that?
Yeah, the biggest parts that we've done is we've added some teeth to the pre-construction and post-construction evaluation process, estimating process. By that, I mean giving our planning officials and building officials the ability to question and ultimately audit at the homeowner's expense their pre-construction estimates, which set their construction time limits as well as their permit fees. And we've shifted the final evaluation to become a required condition of building final, so that it's no longer hanging out after the building's final when no one really needs to move themselves on it. So that has been helpful in getting numbers to our building department. They're still low. And short of—
Are those numbers still just their estimates of what the total costs were, or are they signing something on a penalty of perjury saying these were my costs?
They're signing that too. They're signing that under penalty of perjury. And we've looked at a number of efficient online cost estimating structures, which don't come anywhere near the premium that this community and this part of the world and this part of California actually sees in the real construction market. So it actually does us a disservice to use those estimates because they come in at a national average. It's cost prohibitive to do a case-by-case individual estimate. We're having some initial conversations with other municipalities to try to share a estimator who can come up with a formalized type of way to plug in some numbers and do it more efficiently, but it's still going to cost something, but it's not something we feel comfortable, having the client pay the $4,000 or $5,000, which is what an estimate, a simple estimate would cost to do that. So we're working within a behind the scenes, non-public multiplier that we sort of use as a go, no go for approving a post-construction evaluation, which is high, but it's higher than the standards. And that gives Brian and Robert the ability to say, yeah, this is something that's within reason. And we meet every quarter or so, Robert, Brian, and myself, and Helga, just going over those to look at those, make sure there's no outliers. That's half the problem. The other half is getting those numbers to the county and to see where those numbers then reflect are in the assessments. Much of construction whether it's a roof, it's a window, and Patrick, you'll see this, they're exempt from assessment. So any sort of replacement in kind, they cross off. So what might be $1 million renovation might only be reflected as a $400,000 or $500,000 change in assessment. Practically speaking, because of what's exempt, having nothing to do with the fact that they might have even put $2 million in and only reported to us $1 million.
Do we have the ability to ask the general contractor to sign under penalties of perjury of how much he was paid, not how much the total cost is?
I don't think they would do that. I don't think that they would take down that liability, or it's all, at the end of the day, it's between us and the homeowner, and the homeowners sign those forms.
I thought it required both the homeowner and the contractor to sign.
I don't know that we do, quite honestly.
I think our most recent form does require that. I can't remember which level, if it's at the post revaluation or the initial.
They might. I know I've had a couple conversations with contractors who work in town, and they're pretty adamant they don't sign those things because the homeowner says, "I'll take care of it." Yeah.
But could,
It
it seems like as a city, we would have the right to require the contractor to sign it if they want to build in our city. And we're not asking for estimates.
yeah.
How much money did you report on your tax return from this project?
I'm pretty-
Period. The end.
We've had a hard time getting that. It's a good point. I
It is
mean,
a challenge.
So when it came to council, I remember Jim definitely insisted that both of those be
Yeah.
signers. I just don't know whether that's actually been followed up.
it
Or is
very well,
it
may, forgive me if I'm not, it very well may be on there.
But I agree with your fundamental point, which is that when somebody just buys and sells a property, they're fully marked to market for property tax purposes. But when somebody remodels or even knocks down and rebuilds, we rarely get the full value of that reflected in property taxes.
We're doing better. We're absolutely doing better, and it's demonstrably better. But it'll never get to a one-to-one
Mhm.
basis, that sort of what you're talking about.
Okay.
I think another point is, as we, charge higher fees, I think we need to make sure that our planning commissioners know their job and what their job is and isn't.
Yeah.
The idea of looking at the new fees, I think the city should have paid my wife that fee and not the other way around, the way she was treated.
Yes.
Coming back to this, I commend the study and the council. I believe it's a necessary adjustment, Patrick, not sufficient. I think this was in and of itself, the fees were below cost and the rationale that the consultant laid out. There's no basis for having these fees that for individual projects are paid by the community. But it's not sufficient, as you said, and other things have to be changed simultaneously. But I think they're necessary. I only had two questions, one observation, one question. When you estimated the costs, and I apologize, I only read the cover memo and not what the appendix. Is there a brief way of explaining how you derive the costs? Because when you look at the building fees, the size of project, they gradually reduce as a percentage, which you sort of would expect. But I mean, how firm are our estimates of cost that sort of underlie this study? That's one. And the only other observation is I'm happy to see that these are adjusted now according to inflation or index. I would suggest to the town council that you try and make them as automatic as possible related to a published index and not staff review. I think they should just trigger. Otherwise, you'll get into wasting a lot of time and energy debating what it is. So it's just a suggestion. I don't need an answer.
I think the index is defined though in there, is it not? It's not more than the San Francisco cost of living, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
But I would like it just specified as, I would recommend, you should just have a formula and say, there's the index, it's this year, boom.
Yeah.
Anyway, going back to
There's
the first,
the Bay Area Cost of Living Index. It's published every month. It'd be
Right.
easy to use that one.
that's what I'm saying. I think you should formalize it.
But it is formalized, isn't it, Terry?
The way
It's in the adopted resolution, yes.
Yes.
So
It
the
is
council
formalized?
wouldn't even
Yes.
need to take action, yeah.
Right.
Okay. 'Cause
Oh,
in
it would
the-
automatically trigger?
Yep,
Okay. 'Cause
the
in
council
dis-
could direct,
Yeah.
you
in the
know,
description,
in
it
this
was-
particular year, yeah.
In the description, I thought you said there would be a staff review.
Because we'll bring it for update the beginning of each fiscal year.
Okay, so it's automatic and you just bring it up. Okay, great.
Right.
So going back to the first thing,
So yes, the service time, the fees are based on, in California, we use this concept of estimated and reasonable. Those are our two foundational parameters.
yeah,
And so we looked at adopted budgets, we looked at historical revenues and expenditures over a 5-year window. And we looked at sort of identifying the programmatic costs of building, the programmatic costs of planning. And then we also looked at the individual fee level. And when you have flat fees, you notice like an economies of scale. That was what was catching your attention. So as
Right.
a project grows, the effort also grows, but it may not grow linearly. There may be some economies of scale, but what we did was we worked through, you know, are these minor projects versus complex projects? How much would we expect to take? How much time would we typically need for a minor project versus a complex project? And we use sort of like the 6 out of 10 ratio. So you may have some applicants that are very good at what they do. They've worked in Belvedere many times and they give you very good submittals. And then you have some that are just unfamiliar with the process. And maybe you almost get abused as the town. It just feels like, wow, we're just, you know, something's lost in translation here. The fees are set to the baseline level of typical review required in Belvedere. And then if something goes beyond that base level of review, you would have mechanisms that allow you to continue to recover costs when somebody's gone before the Planning Commission more than 2 times, or they're missing inspections, or you're just having sort of like an excessive amount of plan reviews required. So that's the way the fees are built.
Mm. But you based it on actual cost data of Belvedere's staff's time allocated to projects that vary or California-wide costs. So am I saying like Robert Zadnick on average works an hour or 2 on this thing multiplied by his wage? And what I'm trying to understand is the actual.
Yep, that you got it. It's
So
a
it's Belvedere specific time. and
Belvedere
cost.
specific. Yep.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot.
And Terry, it's fully loaded costs as well, correct? For the
Correct. We
employees.
call it a fully burdened rate.
Other questions or comments from the committee?
And I wanted to respond a little bit to Patrick because I understand how personal this probably feels to him at the moment. But as you say, we know we have budget stressors. We've been trying to persuade our community to raise taxes on themselves, and they don't want to do that. And so in the interim, we're working really hard to clean up our budget in all areas. So, we got rid of the Mills Act. We'll be bringing some changes to ranch costs. We've been working on raising our property tax revenues. And this is just one of all these different areas that we're looking at. It's the most financially successful just in terms of the numbers that are involved, but it's unlikely to sustain all of the budget items that we think are coming, and in particular over the next 2 years, because we're doing this assessment of all of our capital assets, physical assets, that will outline on a long-term basis what the gap is in the funding that we really need to keep the city steady. And then we are going to again probably have to have that conversation around how we fill that gap, because this will not be enough. So sorry that you're doing work, but it is follows the law and it's reasonable for lots of reasons.
Actually, I have one question relating to your comments, Patrick. It's the work of the Planning Commission, that's just a flat fee, isn't it? Or
Currently it is. It will, it's being proposed to be flat fee in most cases, unless it's a larger project, unless it's a larger multi-unit project.
okay, all right. So if the Planning Commission decides to hold umpteen meetings and ask a bunch of ridiculous questions, at least homeowner doesn't have to pay for that. Good.
Beyond, I think as Terry said, beyond the second meeting, there's additional fees, additional costs.
Right.
But those are done at the, at the discretion of the applicant, asking for
Asking for
or
more
accepting
money.
a continuance.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Other questions or
Just-
comments?
If you don't mind, just one quick thing, which is interesting too, your comment about where the costs come from. They are, and this came up in our council meeting, I didn't respond to it then. They are our costs. They are based on our 5-year experience with that cost. And the fees, as Terry talked about, will be analyzed each year, not only from an accelerator broadly speaking, but are they keeping track with what our costs are? But on the other side of that, and there were a few particular items that were brought up in the council meeting that we were trying to recover costs, but the question came up, are our costs reasonable? Are we actually spending too much on this particular service, and should we address that? So it'll be looked at in both ways, in the sense that if we're doing something that arguably feels too expensive from a fee perspective, maybe we need to address what's the service we're providing, and are we doing it as efficiently as we can?
Other questions or comments? Hearing none. Terry, thank you very much. Helga, is there anything else you or Robert want to add to this discussion? Okay,
Thank you all for
I
your
think we're
time.
concluded. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
I'm going to go ahead and log off. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to number 4 on the agenda of a discussion and possible action regarding the 25-26 preliminary operating budget review. Helga.
Good afternoon, Chair McCaskill and committee. Before you today is the preliminary operating and capital budget for fiscal year 25-26. I wanted to highlight in the table 6 of the staff report, the beginning and ending balances for the general fund were not updated to show the final figures. However, the final numbers are correctly presented in the other tables and in the budget document, and the change in fund balance shown is still correct. To begin with some revenue highlights, the general fund revenue reflects an increase of 4.5% over the current year's budget, which is approximately $418,000. This year, the County of Marin estimates secured property tax revenue will increase by 4.85% compared to our fiscal year 24-25 budget estimates. The budget incorporates a slightly more conservative 3.5% increase in secured property tax revenues over the current year actuals and a 4.7% increase over the current year's budget. Total property taxes are estimated to increase 2.8% compared to anticipated current year actuals and 4.2% over the current year's budget, which is a $317,000 increase. The city has experienced a notable decline in building and planning revenues compared to the period during the COVID pandemic, and we adjusted our budget accordingly for 24-25. We have observed a slight increase in revenue from construction permits and plan reviews so far this year, and we have budgeted for a modest increase in fiscal year 25-26. This outlook remains cautious due to ongoing economic uncertainty, rising building costs, and potential impacts of tariffs on construction materials. As mentioned in the user fee study presentation, our new fee schedule was approved at the council on Monday, April 14th, and will be effective July 1st. We are budgeting for new revenue associated with these fees starting in fiscal year 26-27, when the full effects of the first year can be measured. The anticipated new revenue will be phased in over the fiscal period, beginning with 82% cost recovery in fiscal year 26-27, or $594,000, rising gradually to the targeted cost recovery of 92% by fiscal year 29-30, or $802,000 in revenue. A one-time increase in building permit and plan review fee is expected from the Mallard Point project in fiscal year 27-28, based on the project's current timeline. However, changes in market conditions or other external factors could affect the timing. And this is just a projection until the project is actually underway. There are no active grants at this time to be included in the proposed budget. We are not anticipating any new grant revenue funds, but we are always looking for grant funding opportunities through partner agencies that we may be eligible for. Now for the expenditure side, from the general fund, we continue the deferral of filling the vacant police officer position through the forecast period. A 3-year contract was negotiated with represented and non-represented groups beginning with fiscal year 23-24. The contract includes a 10% cost of living adjustment spread out over 3 years with a 3% increase set for 25-26. The budget includes anticipated consultant expenses for implementing the housing element, goals, programs, and policies, as well as revisions to the odds program. It also allocates funds for general legal costs and ongoing litigation. Specifically, there is $25,000 earmarked for the implementation of the city's 2030 climate action plan and $40,000 designated for a special project manager for the Mallard Point project, which will be reimbursed upon the issuance of that building permit. Tiburon Fire is estimating a 7.5% increase in our contract costs again this coming fiscal year due to increase in district expenditures and upcoming significant capital improvements. From the capital equipment fund, the budget allocates $290,000 to replace a 25-year-old public works street sweeper, which is expensive to maintain and parts are becoming difficult to find. For the police department, $110,000 is allocated to replace one of their black and white vehicles with a similar hybrid model. This total includes the outfitting of the vehicle with required police equipment. Also, $30,000 for replacement of the PD's in-car mobile data computers and $17,000 for 6 Flock automatic license plate reader system cameras to replace the 6 in the city that are at the end of their useful life. The new system will also align with other agencies in Marin. From the Capital Improvement Fund, the proposed budget includes the beginning of construction on the Beach Road Stabilization Project set to commence in fiscal year 25-26 and be completed in fiscal year 26-27. The estimated cost for this project is $3.79 million based on the most recent comprehensive cost assessment. We expect that $3.49 million will be funded through the Critical Infrastructure Reserve Fund. Additionally, for the next 5 years, we have allocated $80,000 annually for lane improvement projects, $15,000 each year for vegetation management and fire fuel reduction, and $20,000 annually to support the development and implementation of the city's emergency evacuation plan, among other capital projects in the budget. Some of these projects will receive funding from partner agencies and/or private donations. Now for some pension highlights. The slide shows our required payments to CalPERS to cover our unfunded accrued liability, plus payments on the lease-back debt, the funds from which were used to make a lump sum payment to CalPERS. The fiscal year 25-26 UAL payment is based on the most recent valuation report from June 30th, 2023. CalPERS investment return was a negative 6.1% for the period ending June 30th of 2022, and an investment return of 6.1% for the period ending June 30th, 23, which remains below the CalPERS target rate of 6.8 and therefore influences the increase in our required UAL payment over the 5-year period. And this slide shows the anticipated transfers from the general fund that are part of this budget. The fire is, transfer to the fire fund is 1.3 million. And then we have the 300,000 transfer to the section 115 fund. We have 200 going to the insurance and legal reserve fund to cover continuing legal expenses outside of the city's insured risk. The pension related debt obligation fund of 240,000, the capital improvement fund for 791,000, the road impact fee fund for 120,000, and the critical infrastructure fund for 550,000, and the equipment replacement fund for 461,000. And this brings us to a summary of the proposed budget. The proposed budget anticipates total operating revenues of 10.8 million and total operating expenditures of 10.1 million, resulting in an operating surplus of 718,000. Capital revenues are estimated at 576,000, while capital expenditures are projected to be 4.13 million, leading to a capital fund deficit of 3.55 million, which is primarily due to the 2.6 million in expenditure for the Beach Road stabilization project next year. In summary, total revenues are expected to reach 11.4 million, with total expenditures anticipated to be 14.2 million, creating a budget deficit of 2.83 million. Again, the deficit reflects the extraordinary cost associated with the Beach Road stabilization project. And this slide represents the estimated fund balance at June 30th, 2026. The general fund is projected to begin fiscal year 25-26 with a starting balance of 6.13 million, which exceeds the reserve target for fiscal year 24-25 by 1.8 million. We anticipate 1.37 million in transfers out to cover this year's capital expenditures, along with 300,000 allocated to the Section 115 fund and 550,000 allocated to the critical infrastructure reserve. This will leave the general fund with an ending balance of 4.63 million. The critical infrastructure reserve fund reflects the 2.18 million transfer out to the capital improvement fund, along with the transfer in from the general fund of 550,000, leaving a balance of just over 900,000. This balance will be used in fiscal year 26-27 to help cover the remaining construction costs for the Beach Road stabilization project. The budget as submitted anticipates returning to a more normal state after these first 2 years, allowing the city to replenish the critical infrastructure reserve fund to over 1 million by the end of the forecast period. And this brings us to our general fund reserve. The reserve policy is to maintain the reserve equal to 50% of the projected general fund expense plus fire transfer plus pension debt service. This budget incorporates the policy with the reserve goal at 50% of the fiscal year 26-27 projected general fund expense plus fire transfer plus pension debt service, which is 4.57 million. The projected general fund balance at the end of next fiscal year is 4.63 million, and the projected general fund balance is over the policy goal by 56,000 or 51%. And this slide shows the history of the general fund's actual ending fund balance. The fiscal year 24-25 estimated general fund balance of 6.13 million, and it shows the 5-year projections. The green line reflects the council's reserve policy goals. And as you can see, the budget does reflect that it meets the reserve policy goal for the next 5 years. And in conclusion, just a few highlights of the budget. The general fund reserve policy is met over the 5-year forecast period. We continue with our annual contributions to our 115 pension trust fund. We are contributing to the Critical Infrastructure Reserve Fund in anticipation of funding the construction of the Beach Road project and replenishing this fund in the coming years. And the budget does reflect a fiscally conservative approach which allocates resources to maintain staffing levels and operating needs of the city. So the next steps are, we are asking for your input today, and we'll take your suggestions into consideration while we continue to refine our budget projections. We'll take our draft to council on May 12th for their review and input, and we'll bring the budget back to council for adoption on June 9th after we conduct the public hearing. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Let me start, Helga, with just one clarification with respect to the new fee schedule. If the $594,000 expected additional revenue that's not in your budget is in fact realized, that just adds to the city's surplus at the end of 25-26, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I'll wait for the rest of my questions. Other questions from the committee members?
On that same topic, in the years beyond the next fiscal year, in the projection, have we included that 500 something?
Yes, so in the budget, in fiscal year 26-27, we included the 594,000. And then in the following years, we included that 70,000.
I have a couple questions. But first, thank you for this excellent analysis and preparation. Great as always. On Mallard Point, just roughly, what's the expected timeline on that? I know,
Yeah, it's
maybe a
a
little. not
little
quite.
speculative right now. They've submitted their infrastructure plans for the site, which include demolition and reconstruction of the bulkhead. We haven't actually processed or intake any fees for that yet, so we're still waiting for that agreement to be in place before we start reviewing those. So reviewing them is step one. Obviously, we provide incompleteness or completeness letter, and then they would have to provide all the documents. We would process a completed application internally for a building permit and then issue that permit before construction can start. So still, there's quite a few steps even before we can start any of those, any of that physical work on the ground. Optimistically, perhaps they would be starting construction on the demolition sometime this year. But again, we don't know that.
And then roughly how long is the whole construction? I know this is just guesswork, but
Yeah, that is a great question. Multiple years is all I can say right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, it's not just a single phase, it's phased in over time. And it sounds like they're going to be, as money is leveraged and becomes available from the sale of certain properties,
Yeah.
that'll dictate the timeline.
And so I would conclude from that the vast majority of any fees associated with this project will come under the new fee schedule.
Did you want to comment on that, Helga? Because I know you've talked to Brian about that.
Peter, you might want to jump in, but I think they fall under the SB 9. Is that correct?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
I believe it's when the building permit is applied for. So the current development project, the demolition and site utility work that Robert mentioned will go under our old schedule.
Right.
Subsequent applications, when they're submitted, will go under
Okay.
whatever schedule is in place at that point in time.
Okay.
It's also a legal question, like Helga mentioned about SB 9. How are other agencies processing that, and what can they do? What can they get away
Not
with?
SB 9, is it? Yeah, 330 or,
No, I might have that wrong.
Yeah.
So,
The housing laws.
Yeah.
So I think that's an
Which
important
means they could
consideration.
be-
We based our assessment though, based on our current fees, not the new ones. So again,
Right.
overly conservative.
I know it's a quagmire, but so there are housing laws that might exempt them from some of our standard fees?
The SB 330 preliminary application basically protects them from primarily zoning changes and subsequent changes to entitlements and development opportunities and planning fees. I'm pretty confident building permit application is at the time. I mean, we'll need to confirm that, but I do not believe SB 330 preliminary application protections apply to building permits, years down the road.
I know that's something our planning director is working on with our specialist attorney in this.
All right, I don't want to take any more
Yeah.
time, but I have one very simple question, just roughly in a project like this, what portion would be planning and what portion would be building of total fees? I mean, is it 20/80 or 50/50? Just really rough.
That's a good question. I did have a breakdown of some of those fees.
You can get it.
I can get it
later.
back
I'm
to you.
just,
Yeah.
okay.
We've had about 350 in planning to date. And our very rough construction permits were 1,415. That'll give you a
Oh,
sense
That's close
over
enough.
time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On this page 4, where you note that of the summary, thank you, the non-salary costs are anticipated to rise 23%. Is that primarily related to CalPERS or?
Yes, that was mainly CalPERS, but we are seeing an increase in the insurance premiums for the health insurance and a change in the demographics of the staff and what insurance coverage they choose. We have more family coverage now, which increases our cost.
Oh, I remember that. And I think we have one new employee that is that a Pepra employee or in the last year?
Yes, they are Pepra.
And then on that graph you showed of the future expected CalPERS costs that goes out to 2030, I believe. Remind me, what years do the investment results apply to is it a 2-year lag, I think?
2 years.
Because CalPERS actually finally made 9.3% in the year fiscal 24. So that'll impact our 26 budget, the budget after this. No, actually it'd be this one, I guess, huh? Do I have that right?
It'd be the next one. June closing 24 will impact the 26, 27
20s.
budget.
Yeah, so it's okay.
Yeah. And it's not clear whether net that will work out in our favor, because at the same time, they're still onboarding that reduction in their discount rate.
Yeah.
Because remember, they have that gears up. So
So there's further steps in that?
there's still further steps in that as well.
And then last question on the CalPERS, on that through 2030, you show the unfunded liability cost going up materially. And what's generating that increase?
Again, that's the discount rate change primarily.
Okay. How low does that ultimately go according to their current?
Well, right now, that was only a cut from 7 to 6.8, correct?
Right, yes.
So they have rules in place that trigger a reduction in the discount rate, and it's a certain outperformance versus their expectations. But I don't think that 9 point whatever will get them there, but we need to check that because I haven't heard that triggers another reduction in
I
the
see. So
discount
there's
rate.
a formula as opposed to just an absolute runway.
Yes, there's a formula as to what would trigger a reduction in interest in the discount rate, and they may do it outside of that formula. If
It's
things
funny.
just look
So
bad enough.
So if the investment results are better, they reduce their assumption?
Yes, because they take the opportunity to
I know,
make it affordable.
yeah. Good.
So Helga and I talked a little bit about because it is a very big jump in staffing costs related to non-salary components. And obviously the pension piece is not just our existing employees, it's the whole history of our pensions. But as Helga said, a large part of the healthcare is because of changes in the composition and people with family members that are added to it. And then the other, because we've talked about whether there's any scope to reduce those costs. And really the only way to do that is to require employees to take Kaiser, which we don't require right now. And obviously that would not be something that would be popular, but if there was ever extreme constraints on our budget, that would be an area where we could make savings, but it isn't something that would be necessarily welcome by staff, I'm sure.
Is
Do
there any,
other cities require that?
Different cities have got different policies. Everybody's got a different policy on health insurance.
But the.
We could certainly look to see.
What is consistent is if you want to lower your costs, require Kaiser. So I.
Yeah.
some
think-
plans do employ that.
Oh, sure, of course.
Right.
But my question is, are we an outlier and most of the other cities are requiring to go to Kaiser or are we?
I don't think so. We can certainly look within Marin, but I don't think that's correct. I think most give options, but we have pretty good options, correct?
Yes, we do. So.
Good in the sense they're not that much more expensive than
No,
Kaiser?
that they're very generous options.
General.
So I think there'd be scope to look at different policies which wouldn't put us out of line with other cities, but obviously we want to retain our staff, and that's something that's very attractive right now.
And changes in the rules and any cost for family coverage and that sort of thing, at least for the bargaining employees would be a,
I don't know whether that's allowed, is it? I don't know whether you're
could probably
allowed.
be a bargaining matter, wouldn't it?
I don't know.
Sorry, your question was, can we change the contribution rates for the employees? What was your question?
Yes, that's one example,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, that would be a collective bargaining matter, change of an MOU.
But the idea of scoping out family members or requiring your partner to take their policy if they have a policy, those types of things, I don't know whether they're legal or not. Or certainly whether we'd want to introduce them, but it is an area that's very expensive for us, but it's something that is a significant benefit for employees.
And probably is going to continue to rise pretty rapidly. The only suggestion I would make is that we ought to ask the other cities in Marin. And depending on the answer to that, one consideration would be to adopt a policy for new employees that's different from existing,
I don't think you can do that. can you,
grandfathering
legally?
existing.
We'd have to look at the legality of that as well within CalPERS.
Yeah, but we can look at other cities, what they do.
And it shouldn't accelerate at such the rate. It's just it's 2 employees, correct, that have got family members that we've added in. So that's a one-time step up.
If I were to guess.
Is it 1 or 2 employees that you've added in with family members?
2.
2.
But Helga, do you remember, my guess is the basic rates at Kaiser went up about 7%, didn't they?
They did.
And
yes.
that's been true every year for several years, and that isn't going to change. It's going to keep going up 7 or
Sure, but it's
8%.
not 20-something% or whatever we've seen this year. It would be
Right.
it would be like our fire contract. We know that we're budgeting for a bigger
Right.
increase in our property taxes, but it would be more manageable.
Do employees make a payment for adding family members?
No, the city currently covers family.
Yeah, so I've seen where even if it's a smaller payment, $100 a month or 50,
Right,
that if the spouse has coverage, they're not going to even spend the $100 and that saves you $500.
Right.
But
yeah,
I'm sure it's a
there's
bargaining
different
matter.
options. And we can check what other agencies have.
Do we pay 100% for family members?
We do.
Yeah, it's unusual.
Yeah, that I've been through this with another organization. You suddenly discover, you wonder why 90% of your married employees have all their coverages with us, and you say it's because their spouses all work for companies that require 50% copay. And so you end up subsidizing the costs of multiple other entities other than the city.
So it's worth definitely looking at comps for all of Marin just to see whether we're an outlier or not.
We can do that.
A couple of other questions on this fire protection district. You have this point that the 23-24 true-up allowed the city's outstanding balance to be cleared. So that number that we talked about in the last year or two that was actually not in the audit, but it's now cleared.
According to Tiburon Fire, it is, because in last year, we made that $92,000 additional payment towards that. And then they didn't have as many capital projects as they anticipated. So when they trued everything up, it reduced what we would owe. So
That was my sort of second question on that, what a true up is, but maybe I don't need to know.
Yeah, they just, once they finalize their audit, then she reconciles
Okay.
the estimate for us.
So, we're covered with them. We don't have any residual amount.
At
And,
this point in time, right? Yeah.
and if there is something that accrues in the next year, they'll let us know. It doesn't just sort of get carried on a sidebar.
They would let us
All
know,
right.
so. And they are anticipating starting their Station 10 project, and so, and purchasing some other equipment during the coming 5 years, so.
But it wouldn't come out of the blue. It would come out of the 2.4 that we're supposed to pay initially, and then it would be carried over from year to year.
Correct, right.
There's this comment about what happens in 27, 28. We've got these accruals, surplus, and it's being applied, but then it mentions this updating the 2030 general plan. Just again, on a back of the envelope, what is the cost to update the 2030 general plan?
So we anticipated in the budget is 800,000.
Wow.
Because we got an estimate from a quote for San Anselmo that is a bigger it's a bigger city than we are, but their estimate was 1.1 million. So, we estimated 800,000 at this in the budget.
Do you get anything for the 800,000 other than a plan? I mean, I'm asking seriously. No, you don't. You just get a plan for 800,000?
We get all those rules that get disputed for days on end. Years.
The environmental impact report. Yeah, so that's something.
General plan update, the EIR report, and the 7-cycle housing element update. So
But is the EIR just to confirm that we're good, or it's not specific to any?
I mean, it's based off
I guess if
of-
there are projects in the general plan, then the EIR is covering those projects?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And then, yeah, in theory, when you build those out 10 years, 15 years, however long down the line into that plan, you don't have to do an EIR, or the work is lessened. Yeah,
Okay.
as long as it's a certified EIR.
And what's the rough time duration to do an update to the general plan? Is it a year?
2 years.
or over a 3-year period, because my understanding is it's a process and we have to have it done by 2030.
And this is something that's done every 10 years?
20.
Or
Uh,
when was the
I
last
thought it
one
was
done?
20 years.
20 years,
Yeah.
It's 20 years.
So usually there's a working group that's set up and it is a multi-year process.
Thank you. I have a couple more. You go
No, no,
ahead.
you go.
Well, I have to find them here. So on the 5-year projection, on the expenses in this coming budget year, 25, 26, there's 200,000 for legal and insurance reserve fund. And then the next 4 years, there's 0 for that fund. And so I would draw from that we have some expectation for real costs in this upcoming budget year, of which we're estimating 200,000 that are not normal operations, because it shows 0 for the next 4 years.
Yes. So that covers litigation and claims against the city that are outside the city's insured risk. So some of those claims we're hoping that they will kind of finish up this year. Robert, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, that's correct. I think, most of the litigation that we deal with currently is related to CTL fines. People appealing those and protesting, the amount that they owe. We've got a couple of outstanding cases, which, hopefully one of the larger ones is going to settle soon. which may dictate, how the city council and, staff works with those property owners going forward. So our new CTL process that we updated is a lot more streamlined. We're hoping these types of claims stop as that new system is implemented and gets phased in, and some of these old projects just drop off over time.
And we got some legal input on the new process that council advised this should reduce the chances for incurring these types of costs, litigation costs.
Yeah, that's correct. It's no longer, it's not so much discretionary. It's done at the staff level for the most part. And, there's a series of milestones. If you want to extend your permit, it's a lot more straightforward.
Oh, yeah, it's more
Yeah.
proactive.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other point is that we do have still some CTL fines that are likely to come in, and we don't budget for those, and those replenish this fund. So
Oh, automatically, that's where they get,
we fund it up to a maximum of 300,000, correct? 350.
oh, yeah, because it shows it's stable at
Right.
350. And then last question, as far as just the bread and butter legal costs, not outside of this kind of litigation, those are somewhere else in the budget.
They're split between the general administration department and the planning department.
That's all I have. That's
Thank you.
excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be quick. He managed to cover every single point I had, so.
Here your notes back.
Good job. So that's good. I also thought it was a good presentation, pretty clear. The thing that did jump out to me is this increase in pension and health and everything, and we just discussed it. So it is something that really needs attention. And I know we did discuss the pension issues and what we can do about it and everything else, but I'm thinking of it as a normal citizen in Belvedere, seeing these costs go up this much, and what is the city council and this committee doing about it?
Right.
So it's just a big issue. And then he got all the other specific issues. The other one it came to mind was, we're going to run a big deficit, which we're going to finance by drawing on funds that we build up specifically for this purpose. And I wonder about communication. If again, going back to the general public, it'd be important to get ahead of this and to explain to them why we're running a deficit and that we've had these funds to draw on. It might be a good education moment for the populace, going back to Patrick's point about structural issues. Because when you look at the projections, you're like 51% over policy. So any negative shock in that period is going to take us below target.
Right.
And I think this is the right way of addressing it. I'm not criticizing it, but I think it's an important time that we communicate with the public about where we are and what we're doing and why we're doing it proactively, rather than someone stumbling across and then the headline in the paper is Belvedere runs $2 million deficit.
Right.
Employment costs go up 23%, and then connecting dots in a really negative way.
Right.
So, I think we should think about it.
Yeah, I think this might be a time that we send a separate blast out that separate from our regular newsletter that outlines everything that's going on in the budget, because there's a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we
And
can
if-
certainly draft something and have the finance committee maybe review it to see if it makes sense from your perspective as well.
I think that's a good idea, because I think if you can define the debate rather than have someone in the newspaper define it for you, you're better off. Because this is a big thing. As it says, this is a big budget, biggest we've ever had. We're running a deficit in some people's minds. Yeah.
That's a good idea. We can work on
Yeah,
that.
and we when we were drafting this, we sort of knew what we were intentionally bringing out. The way that we've reported these budgets in the past hasn't necessarily been that clear about what the deficit is, what the flows are from reserves, and we haven't had the time to do a proper full revision of the budget presentation, which we were hoping to do this year, but this was trying to get us some of the way there to sort of bring some of those important elements forward. But yes, that probably means that we should communicate that as well, because it's sort of jumping off the page.
But you have the opportunity when you bring this to the city council to, as you already do, but highlight more specifically, instead of going through the nuts and bolts like you do here, highlight the key elements as you're talking about that would note the direction that we're going from a strategic perspective as much broadly from a financial perspective.
Okay, I can do that.
Let me just jump in. I had three things that I think are pretty quick. One's probably an obvious observation that the budget calls for 290,000 for a new street sweeper and another 110,000 for a new police vehicle. I have no idea how much foreign content is in those two cars, but it seems like we might want to investigate that as soon as possible and maybe even accelerate the purchase of those two for all the obvious reasons. Just an observation. Next, I'm curious, can you amplify a little bit on the Artist View project? Where does, this has probably been in the ARC and I just missed it, but where is the 177,000 grant for Artist View coming from?
Yeah, that's right. It's a Prop 68 grant, which includes a match fund from the city of roughly 20,000 or a little more.
It's a 20% match from the city, so the city's portion is 44,000, a little over 44,000, so.
But what is Prop 68?
Oh, it's a recreation, it's through the state of California, and it's a recreation that the money has to be used on something that's recreation oriented.
And we've gotten the grant?
We have the grant.
Wow.
But we have to use it by,
But we have to use it by, I believe it's June 2028,
Okay.
so.
All right.
so this has been,
And the sidewalk on Beach Road, isn't that recreation?
it has to
Oh.
have a parcel
It
number.
has to have its own parcel number, and it has to be able to have a deed restriction for 30 years. So it limits where we can use it.
This is the only project that anyone's come up with that meets the criterion. The other criterion that we might or might not meet is that the project can't be controversial. And so we're working for California state to, that's just one of the requirements. And so,
How is that defined?
well, so this is the next step that the people involved are working very actively with the homeowners nearby to try and get them on board, which wasn't the case last time for at least a few of them, because it's a much more modest project to see whether they can get, wholesale support. And if there is some opposition, I guess we have to go back to Cal State and say, this is the state of the project. Does it qualify?
Right.
Because we don't want them to turn around and say, yeah, sorry, you built it, but we're not giving you the money because it's a controversial project.
Yeah.
So there's a number of steps.
Yep. Okay, and the last item is at the end of the report, you listed unfunded expenditures that have been deferred. And the one that still gives me heartache is the utility undergrounding along West Shore Road. And primarily, well, one observation and one question. The observation is that, hopefully most of us remember, the retired fire marshal from Nevada that was helping us over the last couple of years very definitively said that is the by far greatest fire risk in Belvedere, West Shore. And that if that ever caught fire in under the wrong conditions, it would sweep up the hill and our fire department wouldn't be able to control it. And part and parcel of that, I thought under our prior city manager had convinced PG&E that there's some funds set aside for that. Is my memory bad on that?
I don't think we have funds set aside specifically for West Shore. No, not for undergrounding at least. I don't think so. We contemplated a project with PG&E on Lower Golden Gate, but again, that was more resident driven. There just wasn't enough political will to get that done when they started looking at the costs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
We put
and
aside
at one
money.
point, we were thinking about buying some of Tiburon's PG&E things at a discounted rate. I guess that never happened.
That would have been for Lower Golden Gate to get that project moving.
Okay.
Yeah. That program has since expired, though. I think we call it the Rule 20B program through PG&E. So it's been defunded, unfortunately.
Okay. So where does that leave us with West Shore? A nice project and no one has any ideas how we'll ever fund it?
I mean, the first step could be to find out what it would cost. The problem on West Shore and with a lot of these, leftover districts is you don't really have a good way of assessing.
Yeah, the people don't want to
properties to
pay
get
for
it
it because they
done.
don't look at the polls.
Right. So I think a good portion of it's going to have to be funded by the city.
Is that going to be part of the capital assessments that you do? Is that, it's not actually a physical asset, but is that in the bucket of things that will be assessed in terms of costs?
It's not at this point, no. We haven't considered it, but we could find out more about how to include it. If it's if it's a priority.
Is it reasonable to do a targeted survey through our website of West Shore people just to see, to garner the interest? I understand ultimately they're not looking at it and they would.
And it
probably-
doesn't
Yeah, I
burn
mean,
in
the
their
people
direction.
that ought to
it
be
burns
worried
out.
I know, I mean, but
Or-
just broadly speaking,
Mhm.
if I lived there, I would understand that this is not a West Shore only or even primary responsibility, but I would pay something, I wouldn't pay everything. If I lived there, that's what I would think.
Mhm.
And I'd be curious what the level of interest is for that street. And then we go beyond it to see what happens with Uphill people.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, and their website, like you said, does have the capability of doing that targeted type of outreach, something we can look into.
But also, can't we go back and press PG? I mean, PG&E claims they're doing all this undergrounding. And if we had a reasonable presentation to PG&E as to what the fire risks are, and you could end up with another Southern California situation right here in Belvedere, that maybe we could convince them to devote some funding to it.
Yeah, I think the hard part is, they're focusing their undergrounding, they're funding undergrounding projects throughout the state, and they're focusing that on areas where in the wildland urban interface, high fire risk. So Belvedere's outside of that. We'd really have to convince them, like you said, that West Shore is maybe an
It's a
outlier.
unique high-risk situation. Yeah.
Right, yeah, it'd be some lobbying with them to try and get that done, but it's worth looking into. It's a good idea.
Have you ever managed to reach PG&E?
We did that one time.
Those are the only comments I have. Patrick or Sally?
No additional comments, no.
Sally?
I had one question, which is the retaining wall replacement on Bellevue and Alcatraz. Do you mind providing a bit more context and detail?
Yes. So that wall is on Bellevue. The address of the property closest to it is on Alcatraz. But as you're going up the hill, you'll see it on the left-hand side. It's an old concrete wall with concrete chunks that have been flaking off the wall for quite a while. There are exposed bits of pipe inside there. There's no real reinforcement, with rebar or anything. And we've been doing surveys of our city retaining walls, and that was pointed out to us as a higher priority wall for repair by the geotechs.
So what kind of number is that to repair something like that?
I mean, I would hesitate to throw a number out there, but it's in the several hundred thousands, if I understand correctly, because there's a few different possible options. One complication up there is the road is very narrow. So the easier options of kind of building over that wall, the existing wall, probably aren't available.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just one quick follow-up, or the Beach Road Stabilization Project, which price just keeps going up as reflected here. Two-part question. Is there any sort of broadly, this is not really a question, it's a comment, I guess, sort of go, no-go type number where this is just not feasible. And forgiving my inexperience here, with our transfer to the capital fund, can that money come back? Or does it just stick around in the capital fund at that point? Once we transferred it, if there is some sort of no-go scenario that comes about?
Meaning it suddenly blows up to $10 million and we can't afford it.
Yeah. Or $4 million or $5 million.
Maybe while you're
It's
thinking
already at
about,
4, I know, just.
while you're thinking about that, I would just say the way that we're structuring the bid for the project, we're not 100% sure what the costs are going to be. So we added bid alternates. There's 3 segments out there that we know, one is worse than the other, 2 are worse than the other, actually. Those are more critical. If we can get all the project done, all 3 segments in one shot, we'll do it. But the way the bid is structured, we have an alternate coming in. If we don't have enough funding for the entire project, we can scale it back slightly to something we can afford. So, barring, 1000% tariffs on steel, I hope it's not going to be a completely unaffordable project where we'd have to scrap the entire thing.
Does it include the current tariffs on steel though? Does it include any tariffs on steel?
No, no, it doesn't. This, the estimate that we have.
And that's one of the action items that we're looking at is maybe purchasing, I think, Bob, you had that point about the cop cars. Can we purchase some of those materials early and, maybe avoid some of the massive tariffs that would come later and just stockpile it? I don't know if that's feasible or not.
Not at our scale.
No.
To just add to what Robert said about the bid alternates as a possible way of changing the project, all the way through the design process as well, the design engineers are very aware of the volatile cost environment, and they're going to be looking at different possible options for reducing costs, such as changing the depths of the sheet piles that are going into the ground. Right now, it's set at 50 feet. It may be possible to reduce that in some areas, things like the thickness of the steel of the sheet piles. So they're conscious of that, and they will be looking at making those decisions as they go through the design process.
To your point though, about does that money get returned to the general fund? Is that?
I think as long as they're not ring fence capital revenues in the first place, there's no reason why you couldn't take it back out of the capital fund and put it back in general.
Do those transfers till the end of the fiscal year, so we would know, so.
Just in anticipation of the city council meeting, I mentioned this to you before, on page 46, the capital departmental budget, you've got fiscal year and budget and actuals the exact same. Is that just an anticipation that there's still more of the year and you're going to get it done, or you're just going to roll? That doesn't look right to me.
What page was that?
46 on the PDF. It's 31 of the document, but 46 of the PDF. 31 of the budget document specifically after the staff report, but 46 of the full PDF.
And which specific line item?
No, the whole thing.
Oh,
It's just like the budget column versus the actual column would be exactly the same, which is just doesn't make sense, right?
Projects aren't being completed this year, we'll roll over and we'll do that budget rollover adjustment
Yeah.
after, as part of the audit. So.
It just doesn't give a lot of information, is my point, especially as it relates to the recommended budget for the following year.
yeah, it's not something that we update on
No, I know.
quarterly or annual
Yeah.
basis even. Well, annually, yeah.
On the 5-year capital, we do show an amount that we're anticipating will be rolled over. So
David,
I just have a very high level question, sort of on this fire and so forth. If earthquake, if the city's property tax revenue dropped by 50%, looking back at what happens in other communities and cities, does the Fed almost always come in?
You mean on the revenue side to protect your revenues, or?
Yes.
It depends, because I know for LA, they've given them, I think, a 1-year exemption from property taxes, even for homes that haven't been burnt, but the state has come in to fill the gap, I think. That's not FEMA funding, that's a state decision in terms of the property tax revenue that you're losing. But that's the whole point of us having our reserve at 6 months. Is if we have a catastrophic loss, we're assuming we lose all of our property
Well,
tax revenue.
we have these periodic disasters, whether they're hurricanes or tornadoes or these fires, and we had Chico, or I'm sorry, that's not it. The other city up, pardon? Paradise. And so I'm just wondering what the track record is, because if you lose half your property tax revenue, you've got a big problem as far as, you know, police force and staff and obviously. And so,
You'll
get a lot
of planning fees though for rebuilding.
yeah,
You
but
have to
not right
waive
away.
those.
True.
You waive them after a
Yeah, you
disaster
do.
though.
Yeah, right. So I'm just looking, you know, for that kind of black swan event where sitting here, you know, we're looking at how much you pay for healthcare and stuff and that, and we need to do all that. But since other communities and cities have lost half their property tax revenue, I'm just looking for an idea of what happens, like in half the cases, they've solved it through revenue from other sources, whether it's state or fed, or that only happens in rare. I don't know what I feel comfortable at least knowing that I don't have to worry about it.
I know we
or
definitely,
knowing
we
that
definitely
I
have to
don't
worry
have to
about
worry
it.
about it.
I'm sure it's case by case, but we can.
It's a
But we
question
can-
probably for, you know, our FEMA rep over at the county. Give him, have him weigh in on his experience with that.
But it wouldn't be a FEMA question though. This is to do with property tax revenues.
So are we talking about the black swan event? Are we talking natural disaster or just an economic downturn like a housing recession?
No,
That's
so these downturns, and I know that we've got internal staff doing some of this work that are covered by the planning fees adjusted, and these things can change. And when they change incrementally, even if it's significant, you've got time to make adjustments and so forth. But if you had an earthquake that took out half the houses on the lagoon,
Okay.
or you had a fire on West Shore Road that took out half the island, your property taxes go in the tank. And all I'm saying is, I feel sort of a fiduciary responsibility to at least understand how that has played out in other places that have had this huge drop in property taxes. It may not be, it may be academic,
Yeah.
but I feel a fiduciary responsibility sitting on this committee to at least understand how that.
Well,
generally-
I think Sally's right. It's probably the state that would have to come in. And probably the best example of that is whatever the state's doing in LA, but you know, just because they did it in LA doesn't mean they're gonna.
Well, or
do
what
it for
happened
the-
in Paradise, or
Yeah, that's a tiny town though, so, but yeah, I mean, it's.
it was a big fire though.
Yeah, big fire, yeah, and.
I mean,
suppose-
we're a tiny town.
Yep.
Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Either we'll find something out or we won't, but. I mean, otherwise, it seems kind of crazy that you could just, I don't know what happens.
Well, at least in the case of fire, the better answer is to figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen. And
Well, I agree.
Prevention, earthquakes, not much you can do about it, but the fire you certainly can prevent.
Well, at any rate, either way, it's a sort of, if you will, a black swan event, but it's, that's just a personal,
Yeah, we can
Position,
see what
right?
we can find out. So,
yeah, I mean, it's not really hypothetical. It's, you could look back at 10 historical events
Right.
and they either got money or they didn't get money.
I mean, it should be pretty easy to call some of those cities and just have a conversation with their finance people, just to find out how that worked out.
Probably just suck it up.
Well, you gotta pay the policeman. You
No, you got
gotta,
6 months.
Tiburon's not gonna let us off the hook on their
No, but you maybe.
7.5% increase.
You got 6 months, you got 6 months reserve, and then I'm guessing you might get some assistance, but you'd have to take loans.
It'd just be nice to know that
Mhm.
the little vignette of
You'd
the
have to-
historical.
Yeah.
Sure, but I am also not confident that what's happened historically would happen in the future because finances are changing so radically and events are changing and everything else.
I
And
understand,
FEMA's changing, so
Big trumpet.
but if you don't understand the
Trump will bail
history,
us out with
if
his
you don't
coins.
understand the history, everything is unprecedented.
No, you're right.
But,
Good question, David.
but to that same degree, I mean, unless we're willing to sort of make our reserve 150%, there's nothing we can do from a self-help
No, he
perspective.
just wants to know.
Well, just, I mean, we can debate this longer, but I mean, it might, how much we try to turn the heat up on PG&E with regard to West Shore Road might be an example.
Mhm.
And, I mean, that's their equipment, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I'll talk to them.
Buck.
No, I know. Tony and I already dealt with them last year. Sorry, I'm done.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Still no one on the public?
No, nobody on Zoom.
Okay. Helga, do you have notes of our various recommendations that may or may not be worth a whole lot that can be shared with the city council?
I do, thank you. So
Okay.
we would just like a recommendation from the committee to recommend the budget to council.
You want an official motion?
Yes, please.
May I have a motion, please, to that the finance committee supports the tentative proposed budget?
So move.
Roll call?
Chair McCaskill,
Yes.
John Wilton,
Yes.
David Walker,
Aye.
Patrick Fader.
Yes.
It passes unanimously. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And
job.
Helga, are
We're-
we still coming back? Are we still
Oh,
meeting
yes.
again to discuss those other items or not?
We're scheduled to meet on April 30th, and we'll be reviewing the semi-annual investment report and the insurance information on the levies. So,
Okay. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.